If you want to know what I think about people tearing down statues in the year 2020, if you want to know what I think about people burning down buildings, breaking windows, looting stores, covering buildings with graffiti, boarding up windows, destroying the downtown core of various cities, if you want to know what I think about that, ask yourself one simple hypothetical question and think it all the way through. How would you feel about these same methods if they were being used by your worst enemies? How would you feel about these same methods if they were being used in pursuit of political objectives that you abhor? How would you feel if they were being used against you and you had to call on the police to save your life, to save your community? I hear a lot of people today complaining that there's some terrible crime against humanity being committed by the police, by federal agents in the city of Portland, Oregon, in the city of Seattle, Washington, in trying to restrain what are, frankly, violent and destructive protests. I hear a lot of that. I have a long memory. I can remember the year 2017 when there was a right-wing political protest called the Unite the Right rally. Seems like a long time ago. 2017. At that rally, there were racists, white supremacists, anti-Semitic people, neo-Nazis. And there were a lot of people, a lot of political commentators here on YouTube asking, why can't the police step in? Why can't the police do something to restrain this protest, this rally? Which one has been more destructive? Which one is more genuinely terrifying? The Unite the Right rally, or what's happened in Portland, Oregon, Seattle, without going into even other examples of cities where buildings have been burned down, so on and so forth? Which one was more disruptive, to use a polite term? If you think that what's happening in downtown Portland right now is permissible for them in the name of their cause, then you believe it's permissible for the right-wing extremists in the pursuit of their cause also. If you think that left-wing protesters can shut down downtown Seattle, can occupy several city blocks of the city, how would you feel about it when it's right-wing protesters? If you think that pro-abortion protesters can do this, how are you going to feel when it's anti-abortion protesters? If you think anti-racist protesters can do this, if you think it's permissible for them, how are you going to feel when it's pro-racist, white supremacist, anti-Semitic protesters? This is not a hypothetical question. Within the last few months, yes, some statues of slave traders have been torn down. Some statues of historical figures who were notorious for their racism, their participation in slavery, for doing terrible things, some have been torn down by anti-racist, progressive, left-wing protesters. You know what else happened? To get revenge, there were right-wing, white supremacist protesters who went down and tore down statues, some of them commemorating slaves, abolitionists, anti-slavery activists. Which one are you against? Are you only opposed to members of the public tearing down statues when it's convenient for your side? Are you only opposed to violent, angry mobs carrying torches when it's convenient for your side? On a really deep level, I look around the whole political spectrum, and it seems to me like 98% of you people still have the mentality that the ends justify the means. Like, the ends that these protesters are pursuing in Portland or in Seattle are so pious, so hallowed, so morally good, that it justifies tearing down a statue, burning down a building, looting, pillaging, breaking windows, graffiti. Political discourse, the possibility of having a political community of any kind, begins only when and where this might makes right mentality ends. Only when we let go of this delusion that the ends justify the means. Right? So that's the difference in the mind. It's not the left wing. The whole center, the whole moderate middle of the political spectrum thinks this. Oh, well, these people want to accomplish something good, like the end of racism. So that justifies these methods, these means, this destruction, this burning, this happening, right? And it never even occurs to them that at the other end of the political spectrum, there are anti-abortion protesters who really believe that they're saving lives. They believe they're saving lives and saving souls, and they're not just serving the public, they're serving God and man. They believe they have the most hallowed moral cause. You think, if you make this permissible, if you normalize this, you think there won't be anti-abortion protesters who have real numbers and real money and real guns. You think they're not willing to do the same thing? You think we're not going to see anti-abortion protesters who occupy Seattle and set up a zone like this Chad zone, who occupy Portland for 40 days, you think? You think it's only one set of motivations that can be paired to these methods? You have to think through how you would feel if these same methods were being used by your worst enemies. And don't just engage in a single stage of analysis. Engage in a full life cycle analysis. Really think it through over time. Think about how that changes a society over decades. Think about how it changes you in your life. Think about how you'd feel when assholes like the people at the Unite the Right rally or anti-abortion Catholic fanatics, when they're coming for you or then screwing up your neighborhood. When it's even just you maybe own a coffee shop and you've got to shut down and can't do business because of these fanatical protesters. You're going to call the cops. You're going to be a hypocrite. All these people who today are making excuses for the violence of the left-wing anti-racist protests, they're the same people who in 2017 were saying, why can't the police intervene? Why can't the federal authorities intervene? When it was right-wing assholes having a much less disruptive protest. And this is going to happen again.
Unrest in Portland, Oregon and Seattle, Washington overnight as protesters set fires and destroyed property. The Black Lives Matter march in Seattle started peacefully, but turned violent as demonstrators targeted the King County Youth Detention Center. Some used sledgehammers to shatter workers' cars.
They slashed all four of my tires. They broke my back window out. I just got off work. I want to go home.
Police and federal agents used pepper spray and tear gas against the demonstrators. Shots rang out. People can be heard screaming in the streets.
There is an alternative to mob violence. There is an alternative to just letting whoever's passionate enough, whoever has the numbers and the guns to tear down a statue, go out and tear down statues. The alternative is democracy. I am the last person to glorify ancient Athens. Most of you will never understand how horrible life was in ancient Athens for the vast majority of people, the vast majority of the time. Slavery, racism, and religion in ancient Athens. Most people don't really want to think through how terrible their religion was in ancient Athens, partly because we're all ashamed of how terrible Christianity was afterwards. Ancient Athens was a dystopia. There's no doubt in my mind. But you know what? There were a few things of tremendous importance that they demonstrated for us, and they even demonstrated the problems and the shortcomings with democracy for us. You can have a meeting at which people actually debate these things openly and vote to decide whether a statue should continue to stand in the middle of the public square, whether it should be taken down and destroyed, or maybe it should be removed and put in a museum where it's part of an exhibit about the history of slavery. That's something that could be debated and decided openly, and you could let all the people who disagree with each other every political extreme attend and have a voice. And you know what? A lot of them would feel ashamed of themselves when they actually stand in front of the crowd and are laughed at. And the arguments that they made up in their own mind that seem so convincing, or that maybe seem so convincing when they were on the internet with a small number of like-minded people agreeing with them, that standing in a public forum, standing in the Agora, standing in the Phoenix, really being in the marketplace of ideas and having to defend that in a Q&A session in a genuinely democratic forum, in the context of direct democracy, suddenly it seems like their ideas aren't so convincing anymore, or they realize what a tiny percentage of people find their arguments convincing. There is no doubt in my mind that if you have a genuinely democratic society and a genuinely democratic process today in 2020, the vast majority of people are anti-slavery. It's not a fringe issue. The vast majority of people are anti-racism. Why don't we have more direct democracy in our society? It's because a lot of us are terrified. A lot of people are terrified of what will happen when you can just bring people together and debate openly. Hey, you know what? Male circumcision. Did you ever think about it? Did you ever really think about whether this should be legal or illegal? Hey, you know what? Cows, they don't have sex anymore. Do you know what farmers actually do to make cows reproduce? Here's a photograph of it. Let's debate this. There are so many evils underpinning the norms of our society that fall apart under just momentary scrutiny, under the briefest sort of open examination, reflection, airing of ideas and debate that can't be supported. That, again, the excuses made for these things would be laughed at if we had direct democracy, if we had the Phoenix, the Agora, if we had that theater of ideas where people could come and argue and debate. And you know what? In Athens, they made a lot of mistakes. There's a great example preserved forever in Thucydides where the people of Athens decide to carry out a massacre against their enemies. And they basically say, well, if we don't massacre them, if they had won the battle, they'd massacre us. And the very next day, I think it's less than 24 hours later, they convene again to debate this, and they decide they were wrong. They sent off one boat to carry off the massacre, and the very next day they sent off another boat and tell them to row as fast as they can to arrive before and say, no, cancel the massacre. You know, you do get to see in the history of Athens the disadvantages as well as the advantages of direct democracy. And there are a lot of tough questions to be asked about what would really happen in our society if these things could be decided through debate. But on an issue like this, if you're comparing mob rule, if you're comparing this, the process you have going on right now in the streets of Seattle, in the streets of Portland, Oregon, if you compare that to what ancient Athens figured out, there's no contest. The solution to our problems is neither going to be blind rebellion nor blind conformity, but some sort of progress towards meaningful direct democracy.
Dun, 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 dun.